comes a moment in a woman's life when heaven stops testing your abilities and starts testing your heart. That is the moment when everything you trusted begins to shake, when the people you believed in reveal their true colors, when the doors you thought would open slam in your face, when love turns silent and friends turn distant. And in that moment, God watches, not to see if you will survive, but to see if you will stay yourself. Because the greatest test of all is not what happens to you, it's what happens in you. The fact that you're here today tells me something. You passed. You stood when everything in you wanted to collapse. You smiled when tears were ready to flood your face. You kept walking when your soul was tempted to sit down and give up. That is honor. And heaven knows your name. You see, God never gives his greatest tests to the weakest hands. He gives them to women who have been prepared in silence. He gave it to you because he knew that pain would not poison you, loss would not define you, and betrayal would not destroy you. He knew that when the storm came, you would not bow to the wind. You would stand until the clouds broke. Passing God's hardest tests is not about pretending you don't feel. It's about feeling everything, the hurt, the disappointment, the loneliness, and yet refusing to let those feelings decide your direction. Emotional detachment is not a cold heart, it is a guarded heart. It is the ability to look at a situation that once controlled you and say, you no longer have the power to pull me away from who God says I am. There's a moment in the test where you have to decide, will I live for people or will I live for purpose? And you chose purpose. You chose to let go of what wanted to control you. You chose to anchor yourself to the truth that even if they walk away, God still stays. That's the moment you moved from surviving to reigning. You also learned something else, that spiritual detachment is not walking away from love, it's walking away from chains. It's refusing to remain in environments, conversations, and connections that choke the very breath of your destiny. You stop trying to prove your worth to those who had already decided they couldn't see it. You stop chasing after doors that God himself had locked. You didn't just leave, you rose. And woman, let me tell you, your victory was not in what you gained. Your victory was in what you refused to lose. You refused to lose your joy. You refused to lose your dignity. You refused to lose your worship. And because of that, you carry a crown that cannot be seen with human eyes, but is recognized by heaven and feared by hell. When you pass the test, you receive something greater than applause. You receive clarity. You can now see people as they are, not as you wished them to be. You can walk into a room without wondering who likes you, because you are too busy knowing who sent you. And you can love without becoming a prisoner to the one you love, because your heart belongs to God first. You walked through the fire and you did not come out bitter. You came out better. You came out not empty, but full of wisdom, full of strength, full of the kind of beauty that no storm can steal. And that, my sister, is what it means to pass God's hardest test with honor. When God gives you the hardest test, it is never to destroy you, but to reveal you. Many people see trials as punishment, but in heaven's courtroom, trials are proof. They are the evidence that God has placed a deposit of strength, wisdom, and endurance inside you that needs to be seen. The test you faced was not random. It was assigned, and assignments are always given based on capacity. God knew exactly how deep the valley would be, how heavy the weight would feel, and how long the night would last. Yet he chose you because he saw what you could not see, that within you was the resilience to endure and the faith to finish. When you were in the middle of that storm, you may have wondered why it felt so personal, why it seemed like the battle was harder for you than for others. That's because God wasn't giving you an ordinary trial. He was giving you a proving ground. Just as gold is tested by fire, your life was placed in the furnace, not to burn you, but to purify you. Every tear you cried, every time you bit your tongue when you could have fought back, every moment you held on to faith when it would have been easier to let go, all of that was part of the refining process. God's hardest tests strip away false strength and reveal true strength. They take away the props you thought you needed so you can stand on the only foundation that cannot be shaken, Him. This is why, after the test, you didn't just survive. You emerge with a different kind of authority, the kind that comes from having been trusted with pain and having carried it with grace. You didn't just pass, you passed with honor. Emotional detachment is often misunderstood. Many think it means becoming numb, cold, or disconnected from life. But in truth, it is the highest form of emotional mastery. It is the ability to feel deeply without being ruled by those feelings. It is choosing to respond instead of react, to hold your peace when chaos demands your attention, and to stay anchored in truth even when emotions try to drag you away. Passing God's hardest test required you to master this discipline. You could have allowed anger to consume you, bitterness to harden you, or fear to paralyze you, but instead you learned how to guard your heart without closing it off. Emotional detachment is not about rejecting love or relationships. It is about creating a healthy distance between your identity and your emotions so that you are not defined by temporary states of the heart. You understood that your feelings are real, but they are not always right. You recognize that if you let your emotions drive your decisions, you could easily be led away from your purpose. So you took back the steering wheel and placed it firmly in the hands of God's wisdom. This kind of strength is forged only in the heat of adversity. When betrayal tried to make you bitter, you chose peace. When disappointment whispered that you were a failure, you chose to stand tall. When loss tempted you to shut down completely, you decided to love again, but with discernment. Emotional detachment gave you the freedom to be compassionate without being manipulated, to be kind without being used, and to be available without being drained. It became your silent armor, allowing you to navigate life's storms without losing your center, and that is why you emerge from the test unshaken. There comes a turning point in every great test when you must decide who you are truly living for. Passing the hardest test required you to shift your allegiance from people to purpose. For so long, you may have measured your worth by the approval, acceptance, or affirmation of others. You wanted to be understood, to be liked, to be validated. But when the test came, those very people whose opinions once mattered so much either misunderstood you, turned against you, or remain silent. It was in that painful space that you discovered a deeper truth, that your life's value does not come from the crowd, but from the one who called you. Living for people makes you a prisoner to their expectations, but living for purpose makes you free. You realize that if you keep chasing human approval, you will always be at the mercy of their changing moods, biases, and limitations. But when you anchor yourself in the assignment God has placed in your hands, you no longer bend with every opinion. Your yes belongs to Him, and your no is no longer apologetic. This shift wasn't easy. It meant letting go of certain relationships that were built on pleasing others rather than fulfilling your calling. It meant disappointing people who were comfortable with you staying small. It meant being misunderstood by those who could not see the bigger picture of your destiny. But in making that shift, you stepped into a higher realm of clarity and confidence. You stopped asking, do they approve? And started asking, does this align with my purpose? And in doing so, you became unshakable. Because a woman who lives for God's purpose can no longer be controlled by man's opinion. That is how you passed with honor. Spiritual detachment is not about closing your heart to love. It is about refusing to remain bound by chains that suffocate your spirit. There are seasons when God allows you to see that certain connections, no matter how familiar or emotionally significant, are not aligned with your destiny. These may be relationships, environments, or even belief systems that once felt safe but are now holding you back. Spiritual detachment gives you the courage to step away, not out of hatred, but out of obedience to protect what God is building inside you. Love in its purest form does not enslave, it liberates. When love becomes a chain, controlling, manipulative, or draining, it is no longer love but bondage. In your test, you had to confront this truth. You had to acknowledge that preserving your peace and protecting your spirit sometimes means creating distance. That distance is not rejection, it is preservation. It is saying, I love you enough to release you, and I love myself enough to guard the purpose God has entrusted to me. Spiritual detachment also teaches you to rely less on the presence of people and more on the presence of God. When you stop depending on human hands to hold you up, you realize you were never truly alone. Heaven was holding you all along. It is a sacred separation, a setting apart that allows your spirit to breathe again, to grow, and to hear God's voice without interference. Walking away from chains is one of the hardest steps in any test because it requires faith in what you cannot yet see. But in taking that step, you break agreements with everything that limits you and align yourself with the fullness of your calling. That is the freedom spiritual detachment brings. True victory is often misunderstood. Many believe it is about gaining more success, more recognition, more possessions. But the greatest victories are measured by what you refuse to lose. In the middle of your hardest test, you understood that the enemy's main goal was not to take away things, but to strip you of your joy, your faith, your dignity, and your identity. He knew that if he could take those, he could break your spirit, but you stood guard over them like a warrior, protecting the most precious treasures of her life. You may have lost opportunities, relationships, or resources, but you refused to lose the inner wealth that keeps you strong. You held on to your joy even when circumstances tried to drown you in despair. You guarded your dignity when situations could have tempted you to act outside of your character. You clung to your faith when everything you saw screamed that it was over. That was your victory, the things you could not afford to surrender. Life's greatest battles are often about preservation. It is easy to win something new. It takes true strength to protect what you already carry. Passing your hardest test was not about ending up with more in your hands. It was about ending up with your soul intact. You understood that no position, no approval, and no material gain is worth trading your peace for. By protecting what truly mattered, you came out of the test with something far greater than what you went in with. A deeper awareness of your worth. You proved that even in loss, you are never truly empty if you hold on to the things that cannot be taken from you. That is the kind of victory heaven celebrates. Detachment has a way of clearing the fog from your vision. When your emotions are tied too tightly to people or situations, it becomes difficult to see them for what they truly are. Feelings can magnify flaws or blind you to danger, making it easy to misjudge character, intentions, or timing. But when you step back emotionally, you begin to see with a sharper, cleaner perspective. Detachment empowers discernment because it removes the noise that clouds your judgment. In the midst of your hardest test, this became one of your greatest strengths. You learned to observe without immediately reacting, to listen without instantly believing, and to assess without letting fear or desire push you into hasty decisions. You stopped giving people access to your heart simply because they said the right words or showed temporary kindness. You began to weigh actions over promises, patterns over apologies, and fruit over appearances. This kind of discernment is not born in comfort, It is forged in the fires of disappointment. Pain has a way of making you pay attention to details you once ignored. You started to notice the subtle signs of manipulation, the quiet indicators of sincerity, and the unspoken language of truth. Detachment allowed you to trust what you saw more than what you felt. As your emotions came under the authority of your spirit, you were no longer tossed around by every wave of affection, criticism, or approval. You could stand still, watch, and choose wisely. That clarity became a shield, protecting you from repeating the same mistakes and allowing you to align yourself only with what serves your purpose. It is the kind of discernment that can only come when your heart is steady and your eyes are clear. Honor in God's test is not measured by how loudly you celebrated your victory, but by how faithfully you preserved your identity in the midst of the fire. The greatest temptation in any trial is to let the pain redefine you, to become bitter because you were betrayed, to become cold because you were rejected, or to become fearful because you were wounded. But you chose a different path. You decided that no matter what the test took from you, it would not take you. You faced moments when it would have been easier to mirror the behavior of those who hurt you, to give back the same cruelty you received, but you refused. You kept your integrity intact, not because it was convenient, but because it was who you are. That is where honor is born. In the quiet, unseen decisions to remain true to yourself when no one is watching. Walking through fire has a way of stripping away everything that is false, leaving only what is real. You emerged not bitter, but refined, not smaller, but stronger. You didn't just survive the heat, you allowed it to shape you into someone wiser, more patient, and more grounded in purpose. Your identity became your anchor. You stopped allowing external circumstances to dictate your worth. Whether people applauded or criticized, you remained steady because your sense of self was rooted in God's truth, not in human opinion. You understood that titles, possessions, and relationships can be taken away, but character is yours to protect. In the end, the honor was not in merely passing the test, but in passing it without losing the essence of who you are. You walked out with your heart clean, your faith unshaken, and your dignity untouchable. You are living proof that the fire was never meant to consume you. It was meant to confirm you. The test did not come to reveal your weakness. It came to showcase your strength. Every tear, every sacrifice, every moment you chose faith over fear has now become a part of your crown. You stand today as a woman who has been tested, trusted, and proven. And while others may see only the surface of your journey, heaven knows the weight you carried and the grace with which you carried it. Never doubt it. You have passed with honor. And what God has established in you through this test can never be taken away.